Vince, my man.
What's going on?
I appreciate you having me. Where are we right now? Because we got the view.
Yeah.
They seen the house a little bit, but where are we?
Yeah, right now we are actually in the Isle of Palms, Treasure Island, which is like St. Pete Beach for people who don't know, outside of Tampa.
Okay.
And just got out here about 8 months ago.
Nice.
Helped finish build this, and my mom always wanted a house on the water, so I was trying to get her to move down here. So I built the house she was going to have to visit. Now she lives 30 minutes away. So the plan worked.
Gotcha. Well, for those of you that don't know who Vince is, now we have Metabolic Mentor. This is something that I've wanted to approach and get to know more about when it comes down to functional health. And I do want you to talk a little bit about that because I know there's a lot of coaches out there that miss the boat or just don't understand the deeper details of what you do and how you can help people.
Yeah.
So can you go over what Metabolic Mentor is and then also, what is functional health as a whole?
Yeah, I think it started off with, I'm a functional health coach, right? That's kind of where the term has gone. It's taken many shapes over the last 15 years, right? And basically when we talk about like a functional nutritionist, what does that mean, right? Because that brings you into the brand. And basically, as a functional nutritionist, I'm using all tools, not just, so if, let's say where I started was a personal trainer, right? Started as a personal trainer. And as a trainer, I really focused on the musculoskeletal system, right? Like how I was using training to manipulate the body. Then later I started adding macro tools, right? So how am I using energy management and to manipulate the body? Then later in life, I learned from all these different practitioners, all these things. I traveled the world, learning from doctors, learning from other coaches, learning from top people in their fields. And I started learning about this thing called like functional medicine. I'm like, what is that, right? Because in my mind, I'm just kind of just a trainer at this time, but I'm learning how to get better results. So I want to understand. And functional medicine there's essentially 11 systems to the body, okay? So a functional nutritionist, what they do is they're not just looking at the musculoskeletal system or energy management. They're looking at how can I improve all 11 systems to maximize performance, maximize metabolic rate and outcomes, but not just necessarily for performance, but also for long-term health, right? Okay. So what Metabolic Mentor is my brand essentially and the method that I've created in functional health coaching, because I was really one of the first that brought it here about 12 years ago now. Okay. And so now we have the university, and then we have a bunch that we teach doctors and coaches all around the world. And then we've also got our coaching companies that actually apply these different methods. And so that's kind of, it started all the way back from a trainer to now, so it's great.
Gotcha. So like you're basically bridging the gap between also creating a business and a life for yourself as a coach, as a trainer, and then also with the functional health side to it, along with everything training related to as well. When you're looking at like clients that come in, what's the initial process look like, and what are some of the markers that you see that you need to create an intervention for them to get them better?
Yeah, so it started out, again, me going back, I started as, focusing fitness science, right? But then this is now 18 years ago, showing my age a little bit. But 18 years ago, I got into bodybuilding too, early. Now this is just like Perillo bars and it was like eat some protein. I mean, we had no idea, and just eat a lot of calories. Sure. Twinkies and protein, just get the calories up. You know what I mean? Like whatever it was going to take, powerlifting or for muscle building or whatever. And at that time, we didn't know anything about how you periodize. We didn't understand anything about hormones to that level. We didn't know anything about the endocrine system, the GI tract. We didn't know anything really about that. It was just push, 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 push. Sure. Yeah. Right. And then over time, as you start to begin to see, especially when I started working with more athletes, because later on I got into MMA a little bit and a couple different sports. And it was easier to see in females first, because females are more hormonally complex than a male. Sure. So it was easier to see the different, when we were tracking, so we would track biofeedback, energy, sleep, all these different biomarkers. And we started noticing that there were trends of peak performance and it was doing great, and then really lows, and then some of the symptoms that would come from it. And then we started putting labs to it, right? And then we were using other units like a BIA, a bioimpedance analyzer, to look at hydration status, muscle fat. But there's also other things. There's this really interesting tool that taught me the most. It's called a Quantum 4. And it was a traveling BIA unit where I could hook people up all the time and like check their body fat.
How big was that thing?
It wasn't that big.
Oh, okay.
It was.
So you could really travel with it.
You could really travel with it.
Nice.
And
That's cool.
yeah.
They still have that? Or no?
Yeah, they do. They do. I still got some here, actually. I just keep them around. I use it every once in a while, just try to check my body fat just for fun now.
Yeah,
but it does more than that. This is where I'm going with this. This was important. So like intracellular, extracellular fluid, it can tell your bone density, it can tell your muscle mass, it can tell your fat mass, right? Sure. Now, we did over probably 20,000 of these tests over 5 years on everybody in every step of whether it's weight loss or it was sports performance. And there was this very unique number called a phase angle. And early in my career, I didn't really respect it. But what the phase angle was talking about was it was able to measure the frequency, through frequency, it could measure the thickness kind of a cell wall. Okay, this will become important in a second. Because this is how I started to understand how different functions actually improved you on a cellular level. Because I didn't understand how my adrenal glands had anything to do with my muscle or my cell. Or those connections were not pervy to me at the time. Yeah. But after doing this many BIA studies, I saw how when you push people really hard and get pro-adaptions in the muscle in performance, there was a point where I started seeing that their performance was going down, or they started eating too much muscle, or now they're not holding enough water, so they're more likely to get injured. All these things, but I would notice that the phase angle would drop first. So meaning that the fatty lining of the cell could thin, and that you didn't want to see that number drop. Because I didn't respect that number. I'm like, who even cares about that number? Yeah. And so that's when I started going much deeper into how do I get the most, especially because I've done bodybuilding nutrition for a very long time as a competition coach. I've worked with many different athletes, usually not until they get really sick, right? Because their athletes aren't thinking preventatively.
No, performance.
Right, performance. Until it doesn't work.
Get the job done. Yeah.
Until it doesn't work, right? Yeah. And so that's where, because this is now, especially with the 18 years, but I didn't get really into this part until about 11, 12 years ago. And it was when I started seeing the phase angle decline that all of a sudden I would then say after that, I would see someone they'd get tennis elbow that just wouldn't go away. They would start getting weaker. Like, okay, runners, for example, they would have a running schedule and they would do this running schedule and there would be a component where at some point they're doing the same runs and they're getting worse, even though they're doing more. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And then watching a lot of these different factors, and then we started doing the blood work. And then we started noticing different trends that also coincided with your energy, or your water stability, so intracellular versus extracellular water balance. So athletes started to get more swollen. They're eating a little bit too much muscle now. Now their blood work's starting to show off. Liver enzymes are going up a little bit. Blood sugars start going up a little bit. You started noticing some of these things. And that's when we really dove into how do we work functional medicine, the world of functional medicine, and then try to tie it into fitness, athletics. And so now when we look at factors, we're looking at advanced biofeedback, whether it's HRV, right? We're watching symptom scores. We want to track those because those are still one of the best. Coaches out there, keep assessments early and often on your clients. It's free, and assessments are still one of the best ways to track and predict where your client's going to be.
Absolutely.
Because when you look at a lab, you're looking at the past. Sure. They were this the other day. Yeah. But if I've got biofeedback history, I can predict where you're going to be. Right? And then now we use other hormone tests, we use other blood tests. People still use some of the biofeedback stuff, BIAs and things like that. Those are just some of the tools that we use as a functional nutritionist.
So let's say, for instance, that because for me, with the fighters that I do have, every day we have to make sure that we're assessing them. Right? There is an assessment process that I look at, whether that be subjective or an objective, right? So communication is key with me, especially if you start to build a relationship with those athletes. Yeah. when I'm looking at an objective indicator, like an HRV monitor or, you know, something like a Dutch test we could do, explain to them a little bit how you can go deeper into the hormones and metabolic function, and even looking at, you know, their insulin sensitivity or resistance even. What are some of those markers that you see, and how can you actually look those up? Is the Dutch test going to be something that you would use?
Yeah, so let's go back a little bit and talk about stress as a whole.
Perfect.
Stress is the trigger for what I call stress. Is it's really a stimulus of change. It's not a bad thing. We tend to look at the word stress, and depending on how you look at that word will dictate how you view life. Because it's like, oh, this is stressful. Or is it like, I want stress because I want to adapt and improve. But we have to understand, and this is the hardest thing to do, everything in life has a hormetic effect. Right? And what that means is that if I apply a stress, it's going to create growth. It's the nutrient of growth, right? But if I apply too much at one time, or I apply it for too long, you pass your pro-adaptive window into maladaptation, right? And this is very hard for people to understand, because when they apply something and it works, the best thing to do is to keep doing it. The same diet, the same training, push harder. So the mindset of one more. We need that. You got to have that dog in you, but you also got to be able to listen to your body and start learning some of these things to be able to go back and forth.
Well, that's hard, you know, because fighters and somebody who's an athlete, as a professional athlete myself, like, it is all about go, go, go to an extent, because we only know how to push, right? And let's face it, as an athlete trying to, you know, exceed to the highest performance that they can actually get to, it's not as healthy as some may think. I mean, we're actually literally pushing our mind and our physicality as much as we possibly can, to almost the detriment of our overall health. So having to pull a lot of my guys back and let them understand that, yes, taking a deload or taking a day off or a week off even is something that is going to help them in the long run. What is, like, some of the things that you would communicate with those people to let them know that, listen, this is what you need to do at this particular time? Maybe something that they don't want to do at that time.
I think the first principle is sometimes less is more. Because we learned very early, 12, 13 years ago, particularly in endurance athletes, that if we, for example, if we took someone who was on a running schedule that had them at an output of maybe 40 miles a week, right? And maybe it's an ascending schedule throughout the week. Right? We found that if we switched energy systems, if we used periodization correctly, that doesn't mean they have to stop being active. That's not what we're saying. We're saying you get energy fatigue. If I do a bicep curl, for example, right, and I'm working and I'm doing a lot of them. I'm working hypertrophy training, but I started doing biceps every single day. There's the positive mitochondria that's going to develop from that, and the muscle fiber that will come from that. But then I'm actually going to create too much breakdown, and my bicep is actually going to get smaller rather than bigger, right? As a perfect example. So you can't stay on the same energy system. Although I could do my muscle training, focus on AMPK, slow loading. I could switch things up, combination movements, powerlifting movements. I still could be working my bicep, but in a different way, rather than an isometric hypertrophy style. That all of a sudden that I can continue to act on the muscle, but not direct. Very similarly, if I took a runner and I split them, even if they're 3 weeks out, we usually would do this. 3 weeks out, we've been pushing. 3 weeks, we took a week off, had them do kettlebell. Right? They're like, what am I doing kettlebell for? Right? We really reduced the load. We would put them back in, and then all of a sudden, they're PRing. Right, within a week. And we were working with different teams, and then how we manipulated the nutrition, how we manipulate their hormones naturally, and how we would optimize all that. All of a sudden, everybody was getting a better outcome. There's nobody that if they apply functional and give it a second, they're not going to hit their best in something if they've never done it before. There's no way. We've seen it every single time. So it was like, okay, now we need to figure out what the recipe to this is. Like, how do we apply it? So when I talk to athletes, I give them an example of the runner because it's one of the easiest ones. If your nutrition isn't right, you could be seconds or minutes off your time, depending on what athlete you are. And at the same time, less will actually make you improve more, but it has to be the right amount. at the right times.
Yeah.
Right, and then they start realizing, okay, if I'm going to give by having to surrender and back off, because no one likes the word surrender, right?
It's a bad term.
It's a bad term, right?
Especially fighters, man.
Right, but you have to surrender to the process, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Give in.
That you can really optimize and actually overperform. And I think watching MMA has been a perfect example. I think load management has become more and more and more important. And I think you could speak to that more than me, but that's where we're starting to learn a little bit. You know, so that's how I start to try to convince them that they need to get on track with this. Plus longevity in the game. If you look at the top NFL, NBA, any sport, the people that how did they stay around 3-5? Look at LeBron James, right? Look at some of these athletes.
Yeah.
How are they doing some of that stuff? And that's where, you know, you start to look at a lot of biohacking and all the stuff that's functional.
Yeah, how much does LeBron spend on his health?
Oh my gosh, I think it was like something around, no, it's more than that. He spends about,
I think it's
10 to 20%. It was 10% for a while of his like income was on.
I want to say it was like
close to that.
11 mil.
Yes.
Something like
that. A long time ago, it was a really high amount of his just gross. 1.5 million. Now it's 1.5 million?
Yeah.
I bet money it's more than that. Yeah, I bet more.
5.
Yeah, and now today with stem cells, all the other things, I mean, there's so much you can do today, right?
Sure, yeah.
But again, back then, more was more.
Yeah.
And it's still that way in every gym in the country. More is more because you have to first get the mindset that like, I have to push past my boundaries. And the body will pro-adapt to that. But then if you keep pushing past those boundaries, there's a rate limiting effect to that.
Yep.
And then teaching coaches to adopt those principles into their athletes and into their clients, that's a big part of the future because that's going to create longevity and it's going to create better outcomes for the athlete or the client.
I did want to talk about concussions, right? Yeah. And the effects it has on testosterone, the effects it has on the metabolism, and like, because these are things that come up in my world, right? So, you know, I've had over, I want to say at least that I can remember 8 concussions.
Yeah.
And reason why I can't remember because I have concussions.
Yeah.
Remember that. But But I mean, it stems back from football and everything else. Yeah. So it's like when I got my test, and now this is why I'm on TRT.
Yeah, we're gonna have a great conversation here. Yeah. I love this conversation.
So like when I got my test, after I got done fighting, obviously I retired, I was done. I was like, man, I felt really lethargic. I felt super tired. I lost a lot of muscle. I felt weak in the gym. And I got my test done, and it was like 300, something along.
I bet you had no free test either. It was all.
No, it was nothing. And so I go, well, what do I do now? You know. So then I ended up getting with a functional health practitioner, and they were like, you got to get on TRT. Right. So I started going on TRT. Felt tremendously better. Yeah. Energy was there. Brain fog went away. You know. And but that's something that I see a lot with, especially my fighters that are retiring and getting out of the actual sport. But can you talk a little bit about like what you see there?
Here's where, so my career took crazy turns due to life in many of the ways. I think we talked a little bit about your life. What happened was I was able, because I ended up getting into the medical field as a consultant. This is where it's going to this point that I ended up getting to work with a lot of different doctors because I started as a trainer, and then I actually got into becoming a functional medicine consultant for a global health company called Metagenics. I kind of quit my group fitness, one-on-one training track that I was on because I got offered this once-in-a-lifetime job. And they're like, we're going to send you out trained under all these doctors. I didn't know people like, you know, I got to learn from people like Mark Hyman and all these amazing individuals that was related to Metagenics, Dr. Jeffrey Bland. And then they sent me out in the world to work with all these different doctors in their clinics and help them build programs, like health programs, cash pay programs, holistic programs, networks, doctors, you know, sole proprietors, any kind of size. So I started working with a lot of hormone doctors because this is like 14 years ago now. Hormones were starting to become more and more important. There's still, people are just still really some people are learning about hormone replacement or natural hormone optimization. I started working with a couple doctors that were looking at PTSD and then started looking at, there's a couple foundations that help our vets that are coming back with no hormones, and they're showing signs of depression and suicide, and instead of maybe going straight to the volume, you know, or whatever, they're looking at, well, maybe we do hormone replacement.
Yeah.
So I was working with a doctor called Dr. Rob Komenaric in Springboro, Ohio, and he like blew my mind. So a lot of guys that get TMIs, right? TBIs, excuse me. What happens is it hits your hypothalamus and your pituitary in a way that it kind of shuts down your endocrine system. So if you get a concussion, it's likely that you stop producing a luteinizing hormone, LH, and that comes from the pituitary. And so if you're not getting the stimulation from the pituitary to your testes to make testosterone, then you're gonna show real low. But what we learned is that if we looked further up the chain, don't just look at testosterone, you can look at luteinizing hormone and some of these other hormones that come from the top. That's why hormone profiles are so important, because you can help the body produce more. That if you helped at the LH level, that everything came back, and all of a sudden a lot of the depression issues go away, and it's an incredible thing that give people with PTSD, people with, again, traumatic brain injuries or whatever, concussions, it gives them an opportunity to like bring it back naturally. So we started working with HCG at that time.
Okay.
And the results that I saw, some people, it would come back, some people it wouldn't. So then they go to replacement. And the results that I saw made me a believer that hormone therapy is a real medical tool, right? But it's also a performance tool for people outside of, meaning like keeping optimal muscle, keeping their athletic ability, maybe post-athletics, things like that. And so that's why once I saw that, you know, me being a performance guy, watching these people come back to life, elderly that are cachexic and muscles wasting, and then all of a sudden can put muscle and the life comes back into them. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I got to get into this, right? And so that's when I learned everything about hormones. Dr. Rob Komenaric is one of the best in the world. And I got into hormones really, really early to understand them, how to fix them functionally first, naturally first, and then how to optimize through peptides or you know, direct replacement later. And that's why we teach that at our university. You know, we're real big on a proponent of that, in the right place in the right time. Right? So yeah, it's incredible what that can do. So a lot of guys, and this is the tough thing for a lot of males I've worked with in MMA, the more concussions they tend to get, okay, the more their levels stay low. Like my brother, who was an MMA fighter, I mean, his testosterone was 200, right? Tough as nails, right? But it was killing his energy. So then he's pounding energy drinks, caffeine, trying to stay awake. He's still got the full-time job. He's still fighting. He's still going in teaching jiu-jitsu, right? I know the life, right? And if you look at the hormone profile of a lot of these athletes, it's like, that's where I hope the world changes, maybe in the peptide space, that there's room to maybe help support some of these athletes so the longevity stays for them and they're not destroyed after. And I know there's been talks and they're looking at different opportunities, but you know, again, where's the line? And it'll be interesting to see how things go. How do we protect athletes without cheating? What does that look like? Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation.
It is a whole other conversation.
But you kind of brought it with the concussion thing.
For me, like, if it's not to the point of where it's creating an advantage and it's leveling the playing field, in my personal opinion, I feel like it should be allowed. If it's evening out the playing field, like there was, you know, you have guys like, you know, I won't even name names, but there's some guys, some older fighters that were in the UFC. Right when USADA came, and you know they were on TRT, and it was again evening out the playing field with these young kids coming in at 20, 21 years old. You know, and you got guys that are fighting well into their 40s. And you know, you can make a case of they shouldn't be fighting at that particular time, but they are, you know? And so since it's a primal fighting, you know, approach to competition, it's 1 versus 1. There's that issue there of like, oh, they have an unfair advantage, but at the same time, if you really did the measurements, it's even, you know? Or maybe even above, because you got wear and tear on the body, you know what I mean? So you can make a case for those guys shouldn't be fighting, but at the end of the day, they're still going to fight. Let
me give you a really good, clear-cut argument. Okay, let's go to bodybuilding for a minute. Okay, let's talk about females. Females competitors are some of the most at-risk athletes for long-term conditions, the ones that are natural, completely natural, that are not allowed to take any additional peptides or support or anything like that, they later on, metabolic conditions, infertility, all of these different problems that can come up, and the women that stay supported with at least keeping their levels at natural levels, going through trying to get lean, constantly pushing themselves in the gym, those women actually have better health profiles well after the sport. So even though I'm not saying that, you know, getting into this conversation about what's natural and what's not, when you come back to fighters, and I've been working with them because a lot of them find me after the sport because their bodies are broke down. Part of the issue that I have with it is to suggest that they can't take things even like DHEA or other things that can help support them going through stress that aren't this massive performance enhancer. What you're doing is you're putting your athlete at risk, in my professional opinion. There are many things that are the line that will protect bone density, that will protect them metabolically and keep them healthy, that we don't respect. And then they just, and so then later on we see all these additional conditions come up. And so it's like, at what point is there a line where we say we need to protect our athletes that are out there for the rest of their lives? And then what is cheating? Yeah, but I see it all the time because we work on, you know, where's the natural line where we can optimize them as much as possible without going over any lines. That's what we think about all the time. At the same time, we also see in other sports where some things are allowed, how much healthier some of those athletes can stay. If we're talking about peptides or we're talking about secondary and hormone inputs that aren't necessarily direct like hormone replacement, that we see superior health outcomes, and not to mention longevity and in the sport.
Sure. And I think there's a line between performance enhancers, and you can make an argument that even creatine is a performance enhancer.
Yes.
You know, so I think it's that evening out of the playing field is where I'm at. You know, so I think there's a negative connotation there's an outlook that people say, okay, testosterone, that they equate that to anabolic steroids. Anabolic steroids equates to, like, you know, people going crazy, but that's just kind of almost like a microscope of who you actually are, and you're just magnified through, you know, what you take. I think at that point you got to look at health and longevity after the fact, maybe after performing at the high level, because there is going to be a time where you have to live a healthier life. That's 10 times more of what you've already, this small portion of your life as a competitor. You have so much more to live for. So that's where I'm at right now.
When you see a guy take a big knockout, and you see some guys come back, right? And then some guys, the next fight, they look a little withered.
Yeah, I see it all the time.
And then they're getting knocked out every time.
Every time.
That's what that is. But what I want people to understand, what happened to that person is something shut off, and it's usually an LH issue. And so the male androgen hormones are not where they were now, the profile. So they're not recovering, and those people end up having all kinds of health issues later. A lot of times when it gets bad enough. Some of my favorites, I've seen it happen. I mean, everyone's going to start having a chin that gets softer. Okay, we understand that. But there's a big difference. That one big knockout, now it's like, I can tell you don't look the same. And that's when they start getting really hurt.
A decrease in LH is an indicator of having like a weaker. Cool.
You can also look at growth. It's not just LH though. It's also growth hormone. So growth hormone's the other one we didn't talk about. So growth hormone will stop. Your body sends out a frequency of growth hormone. It's like a frequency that gets sent out, right? When you take on a concussion, a lot of times that frequency will shut off. Okay, so you won't be putting out growth hormone anymore, and you're significantly reducing all of your male androgens. A Dutch test, which is a urinary test, can show you all of your hormones. So when you look at a blood work, for example, you're going to look at 3 main hormones. For females particularly too, of course. And males, you're not maybe looking at progesterone, right? But the 3 main ones that everyone's thinking about is progesterone, testosterone, and estrogen. However, you really have about, I would say, 25 hormone and hormone metabolites that are all affecting your performance. And that can be manipulated by your diet, lifestyle, training, supplementation, all those things. But then it also can be done with replacement. A Dutch test looks at all of those. Where's your dihydrotestosterone? Where are your androgens? When I say androgens, I'm talking about androsterone, androstenedione. Where are your estrogens? Where's your testosterone? You see, people are like, wait a minute, there's all this going on in there? Yeah. I didn't know that. And a Dutch test allows you to see all those profiles and how you metabolize your hormones. Because in the metabolism is how natural medicine manipulates those levels. Without changing the level, if I change how you metabolize things, right, I can change your level.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the cool things about that side. But again, we see those profiles drop, and that's why you'll see some of your favorite guys, they got turned off, and it turned some of those things off. Because you're like, how did you just go, that's not normal aging, like something happened. That's what's happened.